At 0214 hours on February 1, 2026, a Russian commander inside the concealed Rubikon Center of Advanced Unmanned Technologies was likely feeling invincible, completely unaware that a Ukrainian Shark reconnaissance drone had been circling 22,000 feet above his position for the past 43 minutes. In exactly 92 seconds, this elite testing facility located near the Kursk and Donetsk border would transition from a state-of-the-art command hub into a crater of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The Rubikon unit was not your standard conscript outfit. This was the brain trust of Moscow's drone warfare evolution, a specialized group dedicated to testing and deploying fiber-optic controlled drones that were theoretically immune to electronic warfare. They believed their hardwired connection to their birds made them invisible to the electromagnetic spectrum hunters that usually pinpoint drone operators. But while they were right about the radio silence, they forgot that heat signatures and visual patterns are impossible to mask from high-altitude optical sensors. The Ukrainian operators were not looking for radio waves. They were looking for the subtle rhythm of a logistics trail that led straight to the Rubikon's front door. This facility represented the pinnacle of Russian adaptation in the drone war, specifically designed to counter the intense electronic jamming that had rendered standard radio-controlled quadcopters useless in many sectors. The engineers at Rubikon had bet everything on spools of fiber-optic cable, a technology that physically tethers the drone to the controller with a strand of glass no thicker than a human hair. This innovation meant that no amount of frequency jamming could sever the link, allowing their pilots to fly with perfect video clarity right up until the moment of impact. However, this feeling of technological superiority had bred a fatal complacency among the staff. They assumed that because they were emitting no radio signals, they were ghosts. But ghosts do not need diesel generators to charge battery banks, and ghosts do not have supply trucks making regular deliveries of fresh spools and warheads. At 0230, the thermal sensors on the lurking Ukrainian drone picked up the heat bloom of a heavy generator exhaust venting against the freezing winter air, a beacon of infrared light that screamed high-value target to anyone watching with the right equipment. The intelligence picture had been building for 72 hours, pieced together by a fusion of satellite imagery and partisan reports from the occupied territories. The analysts had noticed a peculiar pattern of vehicle movement that did not match standard troop rotations or supply runs for the infantry trenches. These were specialized electronic warfare vans and covered transport trucks moving with a security detail that suggested something far more valuable than artillery shells was being moved. By cross-referencing the license plates and the unit insignias captured by long-range optics, Ukrainian military intelligence identified the site as the forward operating base for the Rubikon Center. This was the unit responsible for the recent plague of unjammable drone strikes that had been terrorizing Ukrainian logistics columns. The decision to strike was made not just to destroy a building, but to send a message that no technological workaround could buy safety. At 0232, the coordinates were transmitted via encrypted link to a mobile artillery battery hiding in a tree line 42 kilometers away. The weapon of choice for this surgical removal was the high-mobility artillery rocket system, a platform that has become legendary for its ability to delete grid squares with mathematical precision. The crew of the launcher had received the fire mission and was already spinning up the gyroscopes on a pod of M31 guided multiple launch rocket system missiles. Each missile carries a 200-pound unitary warhead packed with high explosives, designed to penetrate reinforced structures before detonating. But for a target like the Rubikon Center, which likely had personnel scattered across a compound and soft-skinned vehicles parked outside, the commanders might have opted for the M30A1 variant. This terrifying alternative replaces the standard explosive filler with 180,000 tungsten fragments, effectively turning the missile into a massive shotgun blast that shreds everything within a massive radius. As the launch codes were verified, the Russian operators inside the Rubikon Center were likely reviewing flight data from their day's tests, oblivious to the fact that their own location data had just been locked into the guidance system of a rocket that travels at Mach 2.5. At 0234, the silence of the Ukrainian tree line was shattered as the rocket motors ignited, sending a salvo of precision munitions arching into the night sky. The flight time for a GMLRS rocket at this range is roughly 2 minutes. A window of time where physics dictates the outcome, and no amount of human intervention can change the trajectory. The missiles climbed to the apex of their ballistic arc, their GPS guidance fins making micro-adjustments to ensure they would land within a meter of the intended aim point. Back at the target site, the routine of the night shift continued. A sentry might have been smoking a cigarette near the entrance, perhaps looking up at the cloudy sky, unaware that death was currently descending at supersonic speeds. The tragedy of modern warfare is this disconnect between the immediate quiet reality of the target and the violent, complex calculus of the weapon rushing to meet it. The Rubicon engineers were masters of remote warfare, killing from a distance with screens and controllers. But tonight, the equation was being balanced, and they were on the receiving end of the same remote violence they had perfected. The arrival of a GMLRS strike is often described not as a whistle, but as a sudden tearing of the air followed instantly by detonation. At 0236, the first missile slammed into the roof of the main command structure. If it was the unitary warhead, it punched through the concrete and steel reinforcement before the fuse triggered the main charge, overpressurizing the interior and collapsing the building on top of the elite specialists and their equipment. If it was the tungsten variant, the airburst detonation would have saturated the entire compound with a hail of hypervelocity metal, turning unarmored vehicles into sieves and shredding the delicate optical equipment and drone frames stored in the open. The sheer kinetic energy of the impact, combined with the explosive force, would have instantly ignited the lithium-ion batteries stored in bulk for the drone fleet, creating a secondary thermal event that no fire extinguisher could hope to suppress. The unjammable nature of their drones meant nothing when the controllers holding the joysticks were vaporized in a millisecond of expanding gas and shrapnel. Simultaneously, a second and third missile impacted the peripheral structures, likely the barracks and the technical workshops where the fiber-optic spools were wound and calibrated. This was a coordinated, double-tap strike, designed to ensure that no equipment could be salvaged and no senior commanders could escape the kill zone. The Rubicon Center, which had been the pride of the Russian military-industrial complex just moments ago, was now a burning testament to the effectiveness of integrated reconnaissance and precision fires. The destruction of the specialized winding machines was particularly critical. These are not off-the-shelf components you can buy at a hardware store. They are custom-engineered devices essential for the fiber-optic deployment system. By destroying the manufacturing and maintenance capability, Ukraine didn't just kill soldiers. They effectively paused the deployment of this specific weapon system for weeks or even months. It was a strategic checkmate executed with high explosives, proving that while technology evolves, the vulnerability of the human element remains the one constant in war. As the smoke began to rise, obscuring the thermal view of the Shark drone still circling above, the secondary explosions began. These were the telltale signs of a successful hit on a munitions depot. The distinct white-hot flashes of cooking-off drone warheads and the fierce, rhythmic popping of small arms ammunition confirmed that the intelligence had been 100% accurate. The Rubicon unit had been stockpiling thermobaric charges for their next offensive, and now those same charges were consuming the very facility meant to deploy them. The irony would have been palpable if there were anyone left to appreciate it. Instead, the Ukrainian operators miles away simply logged the impact, confirmed the destruction of the target, and began the procedure to bring their drone home. They had just wiped out a high-priority target that had been a thorn in the side of their defense for months, and they had done it without risking a single soldier on the ground. The revenge for the terror caused by the fiber-optic drones was not emotional. It was cold, calculated, and delivered with the indifference of a falling rock. The aftermath of the strike revealed the extent of the damage as dawn broke over the smoking ruins hours later. Russian recovery teams, wary of a follow-up strike, would approach the site to find that the Rubicon Center had effectively ceased to exist. The loss of the specialized commanders and technical staff was a blow far greater than the loss of the building itself. You can rebuild a concrete bunker in a few weeks, and you can ship in new drones from a factory in a few days. But you cannot easily replace the years of institutional knowledge and specialized training that vanished in that 2-second window of destruction. These were experts in a very niche field of electronic warfare and aerodynamics, and their removal from the chessboard degraded Russia's ability to adapt to the evolving battlefield. The strike also forced a change in Russian operational behavior. No longer could they assume that staying off the radio meant staying alive. The psychological impact of knowing that even their most secure, silent bases could be located and liquidated would force them to disperse, to move more frequently, and to operate with a paranoia that degrades efficiency. This operation serves as a brutal case study in the cat-and-mouse game of modern technological warfare. The Russians developed a counter to jamming, fiber optics, thinking it was the ultimate shield. Ukraine countered that counter not with a better jammer, but with better eyes and a bigger hammer. It demonstrates that there is no wonder weapon that grants immunity. Every innovation introduces a new vulnerability, or relies on a legacy system, like logistics or heat generation, that can be exploited. The Rubicon unit's reliance on physical cables made them unjammable, but it also likely limited their mobility and required a more static, infrastructure-heavy footprint, which is exactly what the Ukrainian intelligence analysts used to find them. They traded electronic invisibility for physical predictability, and in the ruthlessly efficient calculus of artillery warfare, predictability is a death sentence. The debris field near the Kursk border is now just another scar on the landscape, but for military strategists, it is a clear lesson. If you stay still long enough to feel safe, you are already dead. But to truly understand why the liquidation of the Rubicon Center was such a critical blow, you have to look past the burning concrete and understand the terrifying technology they were perfecting inside. The Prince Vandal drones developed here were not your standard quadcopters that lose signal behind a thick tree line. These were fiber-optic guided munitions, essentially flying missiles tethered to their operators by a spool of glass fiber, often 10 to 20 kilometers long. This physical connection grants them immunity to all known electronic warfare jamming, because there is no radio signal to jam. The operator sees a crystal-clear, uncompressed video feed right up until the millisecond of impact, allowing them to fly into bunkers, chase helicopters, or hit the weak spots on moving tanks with a precision that radio frequency drones can only dream of. The video feed does not break up, it does not get snowy, and it does not lag. It is like playing a video game with zero latency, except the game ends with a real explosion. The Rubicon engineers believed this hardwired approach was the future of warfare, a way to bypass the electromagnetic spectrum entirely. And for a while they were right. But they forgot that while you cannot jam a glass wire, you can absolutely track the logistics required to manufacture, transport, and deploy thousands of kilometers of delicate fiber-optic spools. The destruction of the winding machinery inside the facility is perhaps more damaging than the loss of the drones themselves. You can 3D print a drone frame in a few hours, and you can solder a flight controller in 20 minutes. But winding 10 kilometers of hair-thin fiber-optic cable onto a spool that can spin freely at 100 kilometers per hour without snapping is an industrial challenge that requires specialized, calibrated equipment. By destroying the workshop where these spools were prepared, the Ukrainian strike did not just destroy the inventory, they destroyed the means of production. It creates a supply chain bottleneck that cannot be solved by simply ordering more parts from a supplier. The Russians now have to source new winding machines, calibrate them, and train new staff to operate them, all while knowing that their secret location is now a crater on a satellite map. This is the difference between a tactical nuisance and a strategic setback. A destroyed truck is a nuisance. A destroyed production capability is a catastrophe that ripples through the entire front line, leaving specialized units waiting for equipment that will simply never arrive. The human cost to the Russian Specialist Corps is equally severe and far harder to quantify on a spreadsheet. The personnel inside the Rubicon Center were not fresh conscripts pulled from a penal colony, yet they were seasoned engineers, drone pilots with hundreds of flight hours, and technical officers who understood the intricate physics of fiber-optic deployment. In the niche world of advanced drone warfare, this level of expertise is a finite resource. You cannot simply draft a replacement and teach them the nuances of signal propagation and terminal guidance in a week. These commanders were the brain trust responsible for refining the tactics that made the Vandal drones so effective. By wiping out the command staff, Ukraine has effectively decapitated the unit's ability to innovate. The survivors, if there are any, will be scattered to other units, their institutional knowledge diluted or lost entirely in the chaos of reorganization. It sends a chilling ripple effect through the entire Russian drone operator community. If the elite Rubicon unit can be touched, then nobody is safe. It forces every other operator to spend more time looking over their shoulder and less time looking for targets, degrading their combat effectiveness through pure psychological pressure. Let us look at the return on investment for this strike, because in modern war, economics is just as lethal as high explosives. The two GMLRS rockets fired by the HIMARS system cost approximately $160,000 each, bringing the total cost of the munition expenditure to roughly $320,000. In exchange, Ukraine destroyed a facility containing millions of dollars in specialized electronic equipment, dozens of completed fiber-optic drones, transport vehicles, and the priceless human capital of the Rubicon leadership. But the real value lies in the opportunity cost inflicted on the enemy. If that unit had remained operational, their unjammable drones could have destroyed dozens of Ukrainian tanks, radar systems, and logistics trucks over the coming months. causing tens of millions of dollars in damages. By spending $300,000 now, Ukraine potentially saved $50 million in future losses. That is a return on investment of over 16,000%, a number that would make any Wall Street hedge fund manager weep with envy. It is a brutal, cold calculus, but it is the math that wins wars. The strike also forces Russia into a defensive posture that inherently reduces their offensive capabilities. To avoid another strike like this, the remnants of the fiber-optic drone units will have to disperse, moving their workshops into smaller, less efficient locations, or hiding them deeper in the rear, further away from the front lines. This adds travel time for every resupply, increases the wear and tear on their vehicles, and complicates the command and control structure. They can no longer centralize their maintenance and winding operations for efficiency. They must now prioritize survival over output. Every hour they spend packing up equipment to move to a new hiding spot is an hour they are not flying missions. Every measure they take to mask their thermal signature slows down their workflow. Ukraine has effectively forced them to fight with one hand tied behind their back, not by jamming their signals, but by making the logistical footprint of their operation a magnet for high-precision artillery. It is a classic example of using a kinetic solution to solve a technological problem. Ultimately, the destruction of the Rubikon Center on February 2, 2026 serves as a grim reminder that in the age of transparent battlefields, there is no such thing as a sanctuary. You can hide from the radio frequency spectrum with fiber optics, but you cannot hide from the thermal spectrum, the visual spectrum, or the relentless gaze of a reconnaissance drone orbiting at 20,000 feet. The Russian engineers tried to outsmart the laws of electronic warfare, but they ran headfirst into the laws of ballistics and logistics. They built a system that was immune to jamming but vulnerable to being found, and in the end, being found is the only thing that matters. The fiber-optic cables that were supposed to be their lifeline became the breadcrumbs that led to their demise. As the fires burn out and the snow begins to cover the wreckage of what was once an elite research hub, the message to every other specialized unit is clear. You are being watched, you are being tracked, and physics does not negotiate with your survival.